Now, our last topic is on the special subject of fever, including the fever that may accompany the flu. This is the most dreaded symptom by most mothers, and people have the impression that a fever is a sign of something terrible and that they must kill the evil fever as soon as possible or something terrible will happen. This is absolutely not true. This is against all known scientific physiology about how the body and the immune system works, and we need to examine this because this determines how we react when our children or we get sick. So for this particular part, I have referred back to a book that was published a few decades ago, but it is still valid because fevers haven't changed in Lord knows how long, thousands of years. And this is the book by Robert Mendelsohn, How to Raise a Healthy Child in Spite of Your Doctor, published in the 80s. It is still essentially true. There's a few exceptions because of our accelerated vaccine schedule and the somewhat new situations, as far as how people treat generally. But I have reproduced his guidelines here so that we can review this, because these are new concepts to parents, many parents, who are simply terrified of fevers. And I will tell you something, I did not have a thermometer in my house when I was first raising my first child, and I did not need one. Now, I could have gone to the drugstore and gotten one if I had needed to check a temperature, but honestly, by the time a child is that sick, you know it without a thermometer. Now, I'm just going to go over some of these facts. Number 3, the fever that you should really be concerned about is usually from an obvious cause, such as heat sickness or possible poisoning. Those fevers are the body's response to a situation that it cannot control. If it's a germ, a mere germ, your child may look and act very sick, but that is the immune system doing its job. Temperature readings will vary depending on how they're taken, so learn, if you're going to take temperature readings, learn how to do it properly. And never let the fever make your final decision, except for a mercury thermometer used rectally in a young child, for instance. There's a lot of inaccuracy in fever readings in the ear and so on. They're very convenient, but they're not always accurate, and frankly, the exact height of the fever is not important. Now, you'll see that I'm advising against treating fever, but there is a huge exception, and that is infants. Infants, newborns, infants under 2 to 3 months old, they shouldn't have a fever. Ideally, they should be breastfed, should have mommy's immunity and so on, but if they are bottle fed, they won't be as resistant to that. But for whatever reason, if they have a fever, something has gone wrong, unless you've just overdressed them quite a bit. Infants we have to be careful of. They're just new in this world and they act a little differently. Now, most fevers are caused by viral and bacterial infections that the body's own defense mechanisms will overcome without medical help. This is a case where the cure may very well be worse than the disease. A child especially is just developing an immune system. They meet a lot of germs, shake hands with them, and learn how to deal with them. This usually involves some degree of fever because that's how the body cooks the germs. If we take down that fever artificially with, for instance, aspirin or Tylenol, we're actually risking damage to that child, and we are not doing them a favor in the long run. People are afraid of fever. Look at fact number 9 here. Untreated fevers caused by viral and bacterial infections do not rise inexorably unless you treat them. They will stop. They almost never exceed 105. The fever itself is not the problem and not the danger. There are viruses and bacteria which the body is fighting, and it may need help to fight those, but you will know because your child will be very sick. If a young child has a UTI or meningitis, they don't just have a fever. They are extremely sick and they need to see a doctor and go to ER and get some antibiotics, and the doctors need to determine that. But if your child is just garden variety sick and has a high fever, His immune system is just doing its job. And measures to reduce that fever are not necessary and may even interfere with what the body is trying to do. High fevers do not cause convulsions. They may be associated with convulsions, but the actual mechanism of causing the convulsions is that the fever rises very rapidly. If high fevers cause convulsions, then everybody that had 105 would have a convulsion. It's when the body cooks up the temperature very, very quickly and exceeds its own ability to adapt that will sometimes see convulsive seizures. And while these may be terrifying to parents, they're not harmful other than the physical results. If a child, falls down, hits their head, bites their tongue or whatever, there's a lot of information in Dr. Mendelson's book about how to deal with that, and he talks about the dangers of drugs. That's beyond the scope of this presentation, but do not be afraid that the fever itself will cause convulsions. Now, what to do if the child has the flu and they're having a fever from the flu? You'll see in our our guidelines, our immunity guideline booklet, that we have a basic acute protocol, perfectly safe for young babies, not infants, but young babies and children and adults. And this slide is kind of a condensation of it here. But get our guidelines and look for how to treat flu. And with fevers itself, go back to our basic acute protocol. These are the facts that are important to remember if you're feeling frightened about a fever. Raising the body temperature, the body is simply speeding up the process of healing. It's cooking germs. Let it do its job. Your child may be very uncomfortable. That's okay. You don't have to bring it down so that the child can run around and make himself more tired. He should be resting so his immune system can get to work and do its job. Dr. Mendelson recommends against sponging children off, meaning taking like a cool rag and sponging them off. I'm not against that, mostly because kids do get very uncomfortable. It will bring it down a little bit, and it gives parents something nurturing to do, and I think that's good for children and parents. But I do not give aspirin or Tylenol. Tylenol has been touted as the safe alternative to aspirin. Moms gave their kids aspirin for decades, and finally, it was noticed that Guillain-Barré syndrome, ascending paralysis, sometimes temporary, occasionally permanent, would result when the child was medicated during a fever. Tylenol has also been associated with Guillain-Barré, possibly not as often as with aspirin, but it has other severe side effects. Sometimes they are immediate. Most of the time they're just long-term and cumulative. But just don't think of Tylenol as the safe thing that, why didn't God give us little Tylenol bushes that we can pick them off the tree? They are not necessarily safe and should not be used except in a serious extremity. Now, if your child, again, is less than 2 months of age, possibly even up to 3, and the temp goes over 100, by all means, call the doctor, get that baby seen by an expert. Fevers are not a concern for older children unless it's lasting longer than 3 days, which means the body's not having a really good success rate with fighting whatever is going on. If the child has persistent vomiting or has any respiratory distress other than just, the usual phlegm and coughing, but I mean distress where their lips are looking pale, it looks like they're having a hard time getting enough air, by all means they need to see a doctor. If the cough just goes on and on, that child is not kicking it. Now, if you've done your homework and you've gotten that child the supplements and the adjustments, that usually kicks them right out of it. But if they don't respond, by all means, get them to a doctor. Now, if the temperature, whether it's high or even low, is accompanied by any strange symptoms such as difficulty breathing, the vomiting, twitching, or any neurological changes. Children will get restless and a bit lethargic when they're sick, but moms can tell there's something when that child is just really out of it. That's a time to go see the doctor. And be aware that vaccines can cause some of these symptoms, and that just because they're caused by a vaccine doesn't mean they're not serious. There are such things as vaccine reactions. That's beyond the scope of this presentation, but they can be serious. One particular symptom to be aware of is high-pitched, shrill crying or screaming, whether it's during an illness or post-vaccine. That's a sign of a neurological problem, and the child should be seen by a doctor. Most of the time, your child with a fever will not have to see a doctor, but it's important to know when they should. If you have any reason to believe that the child's fever is a result of something else, not an infection, such as heat stroke or sickness, or possibly they got into something that was poison or toxic, the body can't handle those things the way it handles germs. Get that child to ER. Now, ignore the old wives' tale, feed a cold, starve a fever. What you don't want to do is feed a cold or a fever junk. Nourishment is very important. You can let the child's appetite be your guide, except that you don't want to give them junk. They need the things that we mentioned in our earlier presentation. They need protein. They need sources of calcium. They need greens and red foods, rainbow foods, and they need probiotics. And if they won't eat those things, and maybe they're just not that hungry. Children don't have to eat, but if they're hungry, they should eat healthy things. Now, one thing is kids will tend to get dehydrated, so will adults. That's why you're always told to hydrate, to have fluids. Can't go wrong there unless the fluid is like soda, which is usually well accepted by children, but full of sugar and actually can make them more dehydrated. If you you can give them a few sips of that. Bribery sometimes works when they're sick. Is not the time to deal with that issue, but you want that child to take in as much water and fluid as possible. I especially like our healthy Gatorade recipe because it replaces electrolytes. Pedialyte used to be a really good source, but they've added a lot of artificial ingredients in there besides the electrolytes now, and generally you can make a real good substitute at home. That's what I recommend. Chase that child around and make them drink water or some other healthy fluid because they're losing it during the fever. Okay, I hope that clears up some of that. I recommend that you educate yourself about fever. These are concepts that they're new to most people. They weren't new to our grandparents, or our great-grandparents, depending on how old you are, but they're new to us. We've been just trained by mostly television ads to think that a fever is the end of the world, and it takes a while to wrap your head around a new concept. So educate yourself about the benefits and the management of fever. I strongly recommend Dr. Mendelssohn's book, but there are definitely other sources of information. One thing that we've lost is the ability to know how to be sick. We don't know what illness looks like. I'm a somewhat older person, and when I was a kid, the guidelines for going to school were that you had to be fever-free for 24 hours. Nowadays, we pump our kids full of medication and send them back to school with fever. That is very poor disease management. I realize sometimes, when the parents are very afraid to miss work for financial or other reasons, they do that. And, you have to cope the best you can. But there's nothing wrong with staying home and letting that child recover, if at all possible. They're going to gain strength and immune system training. Let them fight off that garden variety virus or childhood illness using their healthy immune system, and you will be so surprised and pleased at how healthy they are overall. Okay, well, last but not least, I just want to encourage everyone, take care of your body. We take care of our cars, we take care of our houses, we take care of our families in so many ways. Think of your body as something that you have to take care of. You only get one, and it's the only place you have to live. Take care of your body. Don't look on it as a burden or an unwelcome chore. Look on it as a joy. If you had a brand new vehicle, you would probably enjoy waxing and polishing up that car. You know, when you have something that that you really value, you want to take care of it. Take care of your body, and your body will take care of you. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. Thank you for watching this presentation. I want to encourage you to contact the office and look into our immunity kits. Our trained health counselors can advise you on what would be best for you. You can ask questions and tell them your situation, and we can help you choose the most effective and economical products that will help you get through the upcoming cold and flu season. Thank you.